Happy Super Bowl Sunday, everyone. Are you ready to talk some wrestling? I appreciate you joining us for this bite-sized edition of the Two Bros Wrestling Show and our second annual pre-Super Bowl, pre-game, non-football edition, of course. Before we see who gets eliminated tonight, be it the Bengals with Rams, we're going to talk a little bit about Elimination Chamber, which comes next weekend. And so we want to give you our picks and hear what your thoughts are. But for this bite-sized edition, we also want to start with a little bit of news. So in the world of wrestling this week, it was interesting, but AEW mastermind Tony Khan actually addressed the need to trim the AEW roster. While he did not indicate that he had any plans whatsoever of letting people go from their contracts in the way that WWE so often does, he did in an interview address the fact that he has been willing lately to let some contracts expire. He noted in this interview that during the pandemic, he did his best to keep people employed because without indie shows operating, there really wasn't any place for men and women to work in the wrestling industry other than AEW and WWE. And of course, WWE was letting people go left and right. However, now that we're back to some sense of normal when it comes to touring and revenue, Khan noted that there was a lot of very attractive free agents out there, and therefore he's had to make some really tough decisions as to whether or not to let some expiring contracts go or to renew them. And as we've seen, he's let a few go and has been bringing folks like Keith Lee here recently in. So stay tuned to see what this might mean, because interestingly enough, in the interview, Tony indicated that when it comes to making these decisions, two things he considers are ability as well as fan reaction. So if you have a favorite out there, be sure to cheer for them because Tony is listening. With Raw on Sci-Fi this past week, AEW handily beat Raw in the key demographics and when it comes to the ratings. Now, while this isn't that unusual to do, it was the closest they have ever come to actually beating them in the overall ratings and the overall viewership. And obviously that has a lot to do with the fact that Raw is usually seen on USA, but because of the Olympics, they're not on their home. And it was the lowest watched Raw in the history of the broadcast. But it's worth pointing out that next week is another Olympic week, so Raw will once again have the disadvantage of being on off of USA. So if Tony Khan does want a little bit of bragging rights, and you know they will brag if it happens, it's probably they have one more shot, I guess AEW does, at actually overtaking Raw when it comes to overall viewership and overall ratings. We'll have to see. So on that note, remember Raw and NXT both will be on Sci-Fi instead of USA next week because of the Olympics. In related to programming news, AEW will have Rampage next Friday air at 7 p.m. instead of its normal 10 p.m. start time, and that is to accommodate TNT's basketball schedule. So set your DVRs accordingly. We've had some notable comings and goings over the last week that I wanted to point out. Names popping up in new places. Of course, the Big E, as we reported on the Big E, not Big E. The big one this week, obviously, is Keith Lee finding a landing spot exactly where folks thought he would land, and that is AEW. We covered that on our special Wednesday night edition of our show, so you can hear more about that and watch that in the archives. But also that night on AEW Dynamite, a very eventful night, we saw the debut of New Japan Pro Wrestling's Switchblade Jay White. And I say New Japan Pro Wrestling's Jay White because he is still under contract with New Japan. This is the forbidden door swinging open and probably for a brief run for Jay White, whereas Keith is under contract and is now an AEW talent. Over on MLW, we saw Karrion Kross, or as he's now known, back by his name that he used prior to WWE, Killer Kross, is going to be making a return at their upcoming Super Fight tapings. And so that is another big mover or shaker, probably more in the line of MLW's open door policy. It's probably a one-off appearance and doesn't mean necessarily that he's going to be a full-time MLW talent, but you never know, as that little indie makes a lot of moves. And in a sort of flying under the radar kind of return that no one expected, but this past week on Impact Wrestling, Big Con, as he's now known, formerly WWE's Connor, one half of the Ascension, the longest reigning NXT champions in history. But Big Con made his debut, rather an inauspicious debut, in the fact that the great Josh Alexander took him down in 2 minutes. So again, not sure if this is a one-off, but if so, it was definitely to put over Josh Alexander and doesn't portend great things for Big Con. And then finally in news, Hikaru Shida has detailed some issues with AEW, and it's a little surprising considering the source. She's currently home in Japan and is expected to return to the States at some point and work for AEW. But what's interesting is that she had penned an article for a wrestling publication over there where she detailed the struggle that Japanese women have in AEW wrestling, especially lately. She noted that when the company first started, AEW relied very heavily on Japanese talent, and during the pandemic, it became very difficult for people from Japan to travel to the United States to obtain work visas to enter the United States, and that over the course of the last couple of years, AEW has become full of a roster that has turned over, and the women's ranks are now very full with very young and capable talent that have, in many cases, supplanted these Japanese wrestlers. So according to Shida, she says that in addition to the language barrier, you have, in addition to the pandemic, you also have things like the language barrier and the fact that many of the talent are now a little on the older side and are seasoned as compared to the young talent that she thinks AEW might be looking more at the moment. She said that at one point in time, it was an advantage to be coming from Japan, but now she says it's actually the opposite, that even even though she is very good at speaking English for the most part, that she finds it a struggle. And she's specifically called out by name, like Emi Sakura, as one of her heroes who she thought would just tear it up in AEW, but instead has floundered primarily because of the abundance now of American talent or natural English speaking talent. And this is a pretty interesting perspective coming from the longest reigning women's champion in AEW history, that she would say that it's actually a disadvantage and that she finds it a bit of a struggle. So interesting, and to see how Tony Khan might react to that. And with that news, folks, we will now pivot to our main event, and that is just to go over Elimination Chamber with you. Elimination Chamber airs next Saturday on Peacock. It is coming from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, so it will be airing in the United States at noon Eastern Time. Therefore, we will not be live afterwards. We will have our normal show as we do on Sunday nights. We'll be live on Sunday, and we will review everything that happens at Elimination Chamber, as well as talk about the efficacy of even having these events. This is the 7th pay-per-view they've had in Saudi Arabia, part of that controversial arrangement. And it's the first, though, of their regular mainstay pay-per-views that they've actually held over there. And last time around, to their credit, they did a lot more to make it seem less like a house show and a one-off and more like a pay-per-view. So I'm sure with this being the last stop on the road to WrestleMania, they will pull out all the tricks and put on a good show. But the question as to whether or not they should is something we'll also address next Sunday night at 8. Join us live and let us know your thoughts. So quick picks here. Drew McIntyre is taking on Madcap Moss in a Falls Count Anywhere match. Doug did not send me his pick for this one, so Doug, you are picking Madcap Moss. Everyone take note that Doug says that Madcap Moss is going over Drew McIntyre in this contest. I'm going to disagree with Doug on this one and say that Drew McIntyre wins, and he wins in a fairly convincing and quick fashion. Truth is, McIntyre is still nursing that sore neck. I know he surprised folks with his return at Royal Rumble. He has not healed. He is not completely 100%. They are trying to keep him fresh for WrestleMania and keep him on the in the picture through WrestleMania season. So he's not working house shows, and the work that he does on TV and things is probably going to be done in a way that protects him and keeps things brief. That's why he goes over Madcap Moss in fast fashion here. Sorry, Doug. The Usos taking on the Viking Raiders for the SmackDown Tag Team titles. Doug picks the Usos. I see no reason to disagree with him on this one, because the Usos are definitely one of the hottest acts in the tag team ranks of WWE. And the Viking Raiders, they kind of came out of nowhere. This one was sort of thrown together, so it certainly doesn't seem like it's a program that's meant for them to go over at this point in time. This one is recently added, so Doug doesn't have a pick for this, but Ronda Rousey has been added to the card, probably to get some of that Saudi money, that Saudi payday. But she and Naomi are going to take on Charlotte Flair and Sonya Deville. I'm going to say that Charlotte Flair and Sonya win this one. They find some way to win this one because these are really two single feuds that have been put together in a tag team situation. These will probably go on to WrestleMania, and you will see Sonya settle her issues that she's having with Naomi one-on-one. And as we know, Ronda Rousey has picked Charlotte Flair as her opponent for WrestleMania. So it makes sense that the heels win here, so the faces can get their comeuppance on them at WrestleMania. Then you have a Elimination Chamber match for the women's side, where you have the winner that is going to end up taking on Becky Lynch at WrestleMania for the Raw Women's Championship. It's Rhea Ripley, Bianca Belair, Liv Morgan, Doudrop, Nikki ASH, and one person to be announced. I don't have any predictions as to the mystery opponent may be, but I am saying for this Liv Morgan. And I keep picking Liv Morgan every time she's had a title match against Becky. I picked her for Royal Rumble. I'm going to keep picking her, and like a broken clock, I am eventually going to be right. But I think that, honestly, Liv is getting such great reactions from the fans. She's showing such great passion in her social media and on her interviews about how badly she wants this. At some point, I do believe that they're going to give her that feel-good win, and her going on to WrestleMania and beating an overconfident Becky Lynch would be a great way of doing that. Doug sees this as Bianca Belair, who honestly has been sort of pushed down the card and been a little bit of an afterthought the past couple months. But I like his thought process here, that it's time for her to get back in the title picture, and maybe this is the way she does it. Ends up back in the women's main event 1 year after main eventing WrestleMania back last year. We have Becky Lynch taking on Lita for the Raw Women's Championship. Doug picks Lynch. I pick Lynch to retain. It'll be good to see what Lita has still in the tank. She looks like she might be in great shape. I think this, she's not really done a lot as far as like making returns. So I think everyone's interested to see her back in the ring again. I think they'll put on a good show, but there's no reason for Lynch not to win this one. Roman Reigns taking on Goldberg for the Universal title. Doug and I see this one the same. Our tribal chief is going to go to WrestleMania and have his big match with Brock Lesnar. I think that Goldberg has returned one too many times at this point, that any nostalgia pop that he should be getting is long since over, and it's long since, it's past time of him being believable of winning any of these, because he comes back in title match situations and ends up losing. It's exactly what he's going to do here. Again, getting that Saudi Arabian payday, though. And then finally, you have the men's Elimination Chamber match, where champion Bobby Lashley defends against Brock Lesnar, Seth Rollins, AJ Styles, Riddle, and Austin Theory. Okay, for this one, expect Austin Theory to do a lot of crazy bumps, Riddle to do a lot of hard-hitting strikes, Lesnar to be a machine, have some big moments with Lashley. Doug thinks that we're going to see Lesnar win this one and go title versus title with Lesnar and Reigns at WrestleMania. I know that Paul Heyman, apparently behind the scenes, is really supportive of this idea. A lot of folks would like to see title versus title. Honestly, I'd love to see one world championship for the whole organization, so this is one way that you could get there. I just don't think the WWE has the discipline to do such a thing. So I'm not going to go Lesnar in this one, even though Doug picked him. I'm going to go with Lashley retaining, because I just think that while it would be good to see, I think they want to have another high-level match at WrestleMania, and I think they're going to try to go a different way with it. I'm not sure why they would have taken the title off Lesnar if they were just going to turn back around and give it to him. So that is our picks. That is Elimination Chamber. Thank you for tuning in to this pre-recorded edition. Again, we are back next Sunday night live. We'll go over everything that happened at Elimination Chamber, as well as the arrangement that WWE has with Saudi Arabia, what we think about it. Tune in, join us then. Enjoy the Super Bowl. Go Bengals, and we'll see you all next week.